Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today we are joined by the wonderful Charlotte Nicdao to talk all about the series Mythic Quest. And I feel like I've heard it mentioned that like you're an actor that really, really loves the homework and all the preparation work that goes into everything. And I'm always interested in that aspect when you're so far into playing a character and you've spent so much time with them, because there's obviously a lot of homework that goes into character development when you first get a role, figuring out who they are, what was their upbringing, all of their backstory. But there's still elements of continued character development and preparation and homework that goes into it, even 3 seasons into a show where you're still playing the same person. And so for you at this point, I was interested in how that has really evolved and changed for you in the duration of working on Mythic Quest.
That is such an awesome question. Because I think I remember all the prep that I did right back before we started shooting season 1, that was very much about trying to figure out who Poppy was, why she had made the choices that had led her to be where she is in the moment where we find her. And that kind of prep is like, you almost have a lot of time with it as well. I mean, way less obviously with television and film than you do with something like theater, but you definitely like have the moment before you start filming season 1 where you're like, okay, here's the character and what do I need to imbue her with before we start? Whereas I think, filming season 3 now, it's very easy to settle into the character and stop asking questions. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing. It's like having a trust in, I've done the work. I've been with her as she's evolved from the character that I came into episode 1 of season 1 with. And so therefore I have some understanding about the big things that have changed with her. So for instance, I think so much of Poppy's evolution has got to do with the evolution of her relationship with Ian. That is one thing when you first meet her, and something very different when we come into season 3. And you get to see the moments that make that different. But something that I find really exciting about knowing the character so well at this point, it's almost like knowing yourself really well. Something will come up in your life and you'll be surprised by the way that you respond to it. And you'll think, wait, I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago, of course. And so I find that happening when I'm reading the scripts now. Like I'll read Poppy do something in season 3 and be like, wait, where did that come from? And then the work that I then do is like looking back over the previous 2 seasons and thinking, oh yeah, well, of course she feels this way now because of that. And then honestly, this isn't as heady as all of that, but I really like finding the joke. Like I really like and I know that you're kind of not supposed to, like when you're doing comedy, everyone's always like, don't play the joke. Don't do the joke, like just play the scene. But what I really love doing, and we were just talking about walking before we started recording, but I love to go for a walk and just say the lines over and over and over out loud. I look like a crazy person on the street and find like, what is the funniest rhythm or intonation of this? And that's something that's like a preparation that I do, no matter how far into a character I am.
And with Poppy in particular, there's a lot of comedy that lands from just the immense amount of tensity that she has as a character and how stressed or anxious she is in any given situation. I feel like her levels for those are never at a 0. Like it's always, everything's like the starting point for her is like a 3 or a 4 and upwards.
Yes.
And so do you find when you're looking for, okay, where is the joke within it, that there's a lot of times where it is just that element of, okay, how stressed is she? What are her anxieties? And how is that going to drive the humor?
Absolutely. I think that Poppy always has something exploding out of her. And speaking of the evolution from season 1 to 3, I think in season 1, she has gotten very good at holding that explosiveness in. She only lets little bits of it out here and there because she knows that she doesn't have the standing in her workplace to let that explosiveness out the way that she probably is holding it. Now, season 3, she's a bit more important. She can get away with a little bit more. And I think she's also got way more stress on her plate. And so that explosiveness is almost like constant. And sometimes it's like an excited explosiveness, and sometimes it's a stress explosiveness, and sometimes it's a devastated explosiveness. But by season 3, I really think she's not doing any work to hold any of it or to examine any of it. She's just like letting it come out. And I find that really funny.
And with that explosiveness as well, it's also, she's always constantly in motion. Like you're never not moving in a scene. There's literally scenes where it's like, if you watch what you're doing, you're kind of like swaying from side to side, or it's like, what are her hands doing in this particular moment? And so do you feel like with what you were just saying about there's no kind of suppression of the explosiveness, that's also really changed the external aspect of the character for you as well?
Yes, I think so. And I think that, again, it's like, I think that there are probably things that she has her whole life learned that she's not supposed to do because people think that it's weird. Like, yeah, like the swaying or the like moving too quickly around or like jumping or like having her arms around doing this all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that like, because, and I look, even though the power is turning Poppy into a monster this season, there's also a part of me that's so happy for her that because she has so much power now, she kind of can just like be herself, even though herself is often an awful person.
It is that idea of playing a character and Poppy being at that stage of everything that she's always wanted has now started to come to fruition for her. And what does that look like? And so once you saw that trajectory and that arc and that shift on her journey, how did you answer for yourself the question of, well, what does that look like for her in a character to have everything she wanted, but also in a space where that doesn't take away the fact that she's still got insecurities and fallibilities? It's like she's still desperately clinging for Ion's respect and wants him to notice and value. She wants the game testers to tell her that she's great at her job. She still wants all the same things, but there's almost just a more heightened version to it.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that Poppy's arc over the last 3 seasons is a real lesson in goalposts shifting. I always feel that at the end of each season, you see her get the thing that the whole season she's like, this is what I want. And then she gets it. And then you pick up the next season and she's unhappy. You know, it's like she is never, just like any of us, I think I certainly feel this way. It doesn't matter how specific my goal is. The moment that I achieve it, I'm like, it's nothing. Don't care about it. I'm looking at the next thing, you know? And so I think that is a thing that drives her. And I think it's a thing that makes her miserable. And then when it comes to Ion's approval, it's the same thing. It's like, I think, I'm not sure that there's any kind of approval he could ever give her that would satisfy her.
I mean, I love the episode in this season where that kind of like comes to the surface for her when she ends up at the drunk lady brunch. And that's the moment where all of a sudden she's saying the thing out loud that she's been feeling all that time.
Yes.
And so did you feel like that kind of gave you a different dynamic to be able to play to? And, you know, it's always so great when it's like, what's their drunk personality as a character as well?
I love drunk Poppy. I want more drunk Poppy because I feel like drunk Poppy understands herself better than sober Poppy does. It's like, I think that it's not just that she's like letting the truth out, it's that she's realizing the truth for the first time. I don't think that sober Poppy would ever allow herself to admit how much she cared about Ion's approval. Like she'll always find a different way to word it. And I think, you know, even in this season, you do see her talk about Ion not giving her his approval, but it's always Ion's flaw and not something that she actually wants. And I think that's maybe the only moment where she's like, no, like this is a pain that's got to do with me. This is a pain that's got to do with like, how sad is it that the person that I consider my best friend, like doesn't even have time for me? Like, what does that say about me? And I think, yeah, drunk Poppy is just like a little bit more perceptive, perhaps.
But there are moments where he does give her that validation. There was kind of like that sweet gesture that he made where he was like, it's about you thinking that you deserve to belong on this wall, and you do, and pointing to the massive 10-foot image of her on the wall. You know, and so do you feel like it's less about the thing with Ion, and it's really just always been that she has this confidence in certain abilities, but like you said, because the goalpost is always moving, it's always taking her out of her comfort zone. She knew she was a great architect and engineer, but is she a great, you know, developer and visionary?
Yes, definitely. I think that she has a very particular insecurity around whether or not she is allowed to consider herself an artist. I think that that's really specific, and it's something that she's probably struggled with her whole life. She wants to be an artist, but I don't think she's ever seen as one, and I don't think that she truly believes that she could be one either. And so that's something that she grapples within herself. But in terms of what she is trying to get from Iron, or what she wishes she could get from Iron, I think that he's an incredible cheerleader. And I think we even say that at some point in the show, we say that, you know, she needs him to be her cheerleader because she can't do it for herself. But at the same time, she knows him better than anyone knows him. And I think she sees through the cracks sometimes of that cheerleading. Like, I think that there's a way that you can look at what Ian does as being incredibly encouraging. And there's ways that you can look at what he does as being incredibly manipulative. And I think that sometimes it's column A and sometimes it's column B. And the problem with Poppy is that even though she is terrible at reading social cues, she knows Ian, and she knows when something is up, and she knows when what he's presenting to her isn't quite the truth. And I don't know that she'd ever be able to like point at it and be like, hey, this is not real. But I think that she feels it, and it feeds her insecurity.
And when it comes to the work that she's doing and the story that she's trying to tell, you know, through this season where she's working on Hera most of the time, how extensive do you end up getting in terms of the details for you of the architecture of the world that she's building? You know, what are the characters in the game? How does it work? What's the functionality of it? You know, what would she create based on what she's interested in? Because, you know, obviously we know certain details, you know, and we get that essence of it's a beautifully architectured game, but not fun, you know, it's kind of our essence of it. But I imagine that you probably go quite deep into the weeds of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I first was offered this role, I tried to do an online coding course, and I got about 15 minutes into it before I was like, I'm never going to be able, this is not in my skill set, and maybe I don't need to do this for the character. So in terms of like the specificity of the actual building of the game, I don't go super deep into that. But what I do think about is, why is she drawn to making the game that she wants to make? And so Hera is about creating a world where the players get to build whatever they want to in it. And Playpen is kind of a more simplified version of that. And the simplified version is more fun because you're not having to deal with all these wild like game mechanics. You're just getting to do the thing that you want to do. But I think that the reason she's interested in that concept in general is because that's what she wants to do. She's spent her entire career building someone else's world and thinking, if only I could build my own world, if only I could build my own story. I think both in her work and also in her life. And so, of course, the game that she wants to build is one that allows each individual player to build their own world. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. But at the same time, I don't think that she is conscious of it. I think that if you told her like, oh, so you're wanting to give everybody the freedom and the power to choose their own story, she would be like, no, they should choose my story. But like, I do think that that's the reason she's interested in it.
And when it comes to the improvisation on the show as well, you know, there's times, especially, you know, I think more so it sounds like with guest directors than if it's like Rob or Megan directing, where like they know what they're going to need in the edit. And for other directors, they're definitely, you know, trying to get different options and different choices. And I know that you've talked about how when you first came into this show that you hadn't done very much in terms of improv, and then you're thrown right into the mix with people like Rob and Dave, who not only are so skilled at it, but also have that dynamic with one another from having worked with each other before as well. And it sounds like part of the unlocking of it for you was that realization of, you know, it's not about trying to create something new, it's about trying to build upon what's already there. And so how did something like that really unlock and change the way that you were trying to approach it when this was a completely new space that was outside of your comfort zone?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is that I've always had the most fun when I've been allowed to how do I put this? Like, so I would go into auditions and I would always like be a little bit cheeky with seeing what I could get away with the script. Like I would go in and be like, what if I actually said this joke instead of that joke? And what I would find is that sometimes the feedback that I would get would be like, oh, that was interesting. And sometimes the feedback would be like, the writers have worked very, very hard on this script and it's very disrespectful for you to just come in here and like say something totally different. And so I feel like I learned a lot of lessons early in my career about knowing the right time to try to throw in something new. And it was very exciting working on Mythic Quest, realizing that the writers were like, obviously we want to get everything that we've written, but also let's see what else happens if there's a bit of freedom here. Like I think that there's so much mutual respect for everyone who's creatively involved in the show that it's like, it truly is a collaborative process. So that side of it is really fun. In terms of how much experience some of these actors that I'm working with have with improvising and improvising together, it was so daunting when I first started working on the show. And often I would be in a scene with Rob and David and they would just be like ping-ponging back and forth and I would just be standing there like, which honestly kind of works for the character. And I feel like you see a bit of that in the show, especially in season 1. But I have a lot of gratitude to Jessie Ennis, who plays Jo, who has a lot of experience in that world and in that kind of performing. And she gave me so much advice and so much encouragement, especially in that first season, around how to be in a scene where it's not necessarily playing out exactly as written. And truly it's the thing that makes acting exciting, like playing a character exciting. It's like, well, just know your character really well and don't feel like you have to come up with some witty joke better than what a writer could write, because you're not going to. All you can do is like play the truth of that moment, which is actually really fun. So that's kind of how I try to do it now.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum from scenes where it's like you're trying to add and do a little bit more, there's the challenging aspect of scenes where it's Poppy's working on something at her desk. You know, that's quite a difficult scene to make dynamic, and yet you always find those different trajectories of, okay, you know, kind of going back to like, you know, how frenetic is she? How much has she slept? What snacks does she have at her disposal? And so how do you always work to make sure that scenes like that are going to feel just as dynamic as ones where she's running around and moving through physical space and interacting with multiple characters?
We talk about this a lot because I feel like we've done quite a few scenes over the course of the show where Poppy is like coding manically. And it's like, how do you depict that? How do you depict like action when it's just literally a woman sitting at a computer and typing? And so I think that, like, yeah, as you say, generally Poppy's physicality helps with that, because I think that she is so ridiculous with her physicality that sometimes I feel like in those moments where she's locked in on her work and there is a stillness, that is kind of more powerful. And I really loved doing the scenes this season where we were exploring the idea of flow and what flow looks like for Poppy. And when we were shooting those scenes, which were always really technically interesting, like they had me on a little rotating platform and they had the camera set up to get these incredible 360 shots and the lighting and wind machines and all sorts of fun stuff. And mainly what I was doing for my part was like, I was literally sitting at the computer, like pretending to code and like trying to meditate, like trying to just breathe and really focus on breathing in the way that I would if I was like trying to find like a blissfully calm state. And I feel like that's not something that you see Poppy ever do. You never see Poppy just breathe. And so that was something that I found really interesting to explore in those moments.
Yeah, that's such a great detail and way to have a completely different side by stripping it down. And
Yeah.
you know, because she's also a character that you feel like in watching her, it feels like she never sleeps. You know, it's like, oh, she's definitely been at the office the last.
She doesn't sleep. She only passes out. Like,
do you ever find yourself
into bed? Like, I think that like she might be lucky that sometimes she falls asleep working in bed, but I don't think that she ever like goes to bed.
Do you ever find yourself in kind of figuring out where she's at trajectory wise in a scene, kind of asking yourself like, okay, like, do I think she went to sleep at all last night? Did she have 2 hours? Like, you know, how much candy has she had to try and stay awake through the day? Like, what time of day is it for her?
I mean, I do think that especially this season, or in fact, I would say season 1 and 2, the trajectory is very much she begins the season in the healthiest state she's going to be in for the entire season. Like wherever we pick up in episode 1, that's going to be the most sleep that she gets for the whole season. And so like each episode, it's like slightly more manic, slightly more sugar, slightly more exhausted. And so then even when she's having a good day, it's still just fueled by candy and lack of sleep.
And one of the things in working on this show is it sounds like Rob and Megan and the whole team have always tried to instill this sense of autonomy and in getting to know and learn every aspect of the process. So, oh, like come here, like look at this on the monitor, like see how that looks when someone else is in a scene and why we're doing it this way. And I think it was like you and Jesse Ennis at one point, like Rob just left the two of you in the edit booth with the editor and was like, okay, like you guys are going to edit this scene now. Yes. And how do you feel like that's actually also really opened up who you are as a performer and an actor from the fact that they've given you so many windows and moments of autonomy in terms of the process as a whole?
It's been incredible. I think that this is an industry where it's really rare to have anyone that is has more creative control than you leave the door open behind them. And this show has been such an amazing and generous experience in that regard. On specifically the idea of getting to watch your own work. So watch the dailies or sit in at post-production and like look at what it looks like to have a scene that you were in edited together. I think that there's this weird taboo for actors around talking about watching yourself. Like, I think that there's this thing where it's like kind of cool to be like, oh, I never watch my own work. And personally, I mean, I know everyone has their own process, but for me, I've never understood that. I think especially for screen, so much of your work is about how you're interacting with the camera, how you understand what's getting captured and what works best in which shot and in which coverage and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I think is really cool about the way that Rob and Megan have allowed the actors freedom to see their work is that there's no shame around it. It's not like, well, go watch yourself if you're a narcissist. It's like, no, it would be great if you could see what we're seeing, because we know that you're smart enough that you'll allow it to inform your future performances. And it has, to the point where now I'm like, well, I always want to see what my work looks like. Maybe not as I'm doing it, because then of course you can get in your head, but like at the end of a week or the week after you shoot an episode, I'd love to see what it was that I did last week. Because I think especially when you're in a performance, it's very easy to just like get lost in that moment. And then to be able to see what it actually reads like afterwards, how the audience is going to see it, really helps to inform then the choices that you're making for the episode after that and the episode after that.
I really, really love that's been so much of the experience that they've created for you and working on the show. And this season's been such a delight as always. Always love seeing where Poppy goes to, and especially watching the monstrosity of who she is with all this power now has been really brilliant. So thank you so much, Charlotte. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.